Well, back in January, we began on Tuesday evenings to look at the book of Malachi. I'd like us to return there, but I think perhaps we need a bit of a recap. So today, this is a short recap, and then we'll continue on through the book next week. So remember, the name Malachi means my messenger. Malachi then is a prophet who had a message from the Lord. Malachi, we know, is the last book in the Old Testament, and so the book is set in the period after the people of Judah had returned to the land after their 70-year exile in Babylon. So the date of the book is probably the middle of the 5th century BC, so perhaps around 450 BC. Malachi, we know, comes after the books of Haggai and Zechariah. The focus of Haggai and Zechariah was on urging the people to rebuild the temple in Jerusalem. And so Malachi comes after that. So by the time of Malachi, the temple has been rebuilt. This book comes about 80 years after the exiles had returned from their Babylonian captivity, and about 50 years since the temple had been rebuilt. The issue in Israel at the time of Malachi was this. It seems that the people had become cold. They had become lackluster. They had lost their zeal. They had lost their fervency. They had lost their enthusiasm. In chapter 1, in verse 2, we read, "I have loved you, says the Lord." The people might have expressed a love for the Lord, but the Lord knew their hearts. So verse 2 goes on, "But you say, how have you loved us?" God knew their hearts, and he knew that many of them doubted his love. They doubted his love for them, and the love in their hearts for the Lord was cold. We saw in chapter 1 that one explanation for this lay in the example of the priests. Since the priests were cold, then it's no surprise that the people were cold in their hearts too. What exactly were the priests guilty of? Well, chapter 1 and verses 7 and 8, they had been offering polluted food upon my altar. But you say, how have we polluted you? By saying that the Lord's table may be despised. When you offer blind animals in sacrifice, is that not evil? And when you offer those that are lame or sick, is that not evil? Present that to your governor. Will he accept you or show you favour, says the Lord of hosts. We considered more about the priests in chapter 2, how they should be an example. They were to teach the people. They were to practice what they preached. But just consider this as our recap today from here in chapter 1. What was happening was this. The people were coming to worship and bringing animals for the priests to sacrifice. But the kind of animals they were bringing were blind animals, lame animals, sick animals. And the point is, they were given the appearance of being worshippers, but they were not offering any real kind of worship at all. The sacrifices they were offering were just their offloading of the animals they didn't really want. We saw in chapter 1 that a remedy to this is recovering a sight of the Lord's greatness. So verse 11 of chapter 1, "For from the rising of the sun to its setting, my name will be great among the nations, and in every place incense will be offered to my name, and a pure offering. For my name will be great among the nations, says the Lord of hosts." And then also look at the end of verse 14. "For I am a great king, says the Lord of hosts, and my name will be feared among the nations." A day is coming, says the Lord, when people from all nations will acknowledge the greatness of the Lord, and people from all nations will come to worship. What's happened here? Well, the Lord's own people have lost sight of the greatness of the Lord, and that sight needs to be recovered. And when we were looking at Malachi chapter 1, it was the time of the Six Nations rugby. Well, after all of this lockdown, that competition will be resolved next Saturday. But I gave you this illustration at the time. About 6 months ago, the Scottish outside half, a player called Finn Russell, was sent home from the Scotland training camp. And now he's a good player. He's got flair. And flair is sometimes what's missing from Scotland. But he was sent home. Why? Well, because he was drinking in the team hotel. You see, there were rules. You're here to train. You're here, and if you want to be part of this team, you need to be fit and ready to face Ireland. And if you're going to break the rules, and if you're not going to take this seriously, well, you're not indispensable. And off you go. What did Gregor Townsend, the Scotland coach, want from Finn Russell? He wanted his best. What does God want from me? He wants my best. He doesn't want me offering sacrifices that aren't real sacrifices at all. They're just the scraps of my life. The time I give is not my best time, and so on. If I truly saw who God is, and if I truly saw the greatness of his love for me, I would give him my best. When we go to the second half of chapter 2, we saw that the explanation for the people's lack of love for the Lord shifted away from the priests to the people themselves. The men were guilty of something in particular. So chapter 2 and verse 11, Judah has been faithless and abomination has been committed in Israel and in Jerusalem. For Judah has profaned the sanctuary of the Lord which he loves, and has married the daughter of a foreign god. What is the problem with the ordinary people? Firstly, it seems that they were marrying women outside the covenant community of Israel. Why would they want to do such a thing? Well, remember, Judah was just one part of a vast Persian empire. They were one part of 120 provinces in the Persian Empire. And it may well have been that there were social and economic advantages to marrying into other nations. But the problem is even greater than simply that men were marrying outside the covenant community. In order to do this, what were they doing? They were, verse 14, divorcing the wives of their youth in order to do this. So verse 14, but you say, why does he not? Because the Lord was witness between you and the wife of your youth, to whom you have been faithless, though she is your companion and your wife by covenant. So in order to marry new foreign wives, they were casting off the wives of their youth and being faithless to their wives from within the covenant community. The people here were guilty of treating their wives badly and divorcing them for their own advantage. Well, perhaps the priests and the people, in how they so easily divorced their wives, perhaps underlying their behaviour was this: they did not really fear the Lord. In chapter 2, in the second half of verse 17, the people are saying, everyone who does evil is good in the sight of the Lord, and he delights in them. Or by asking, where is the God of justice? Perhaps the people don't see a problem with their sin, because as they look out at the world around them, it seems like they live in a world where those who do evil are blessed. So they ask the question, where is the God of justice? Well, chapter 3 begins with this: behold, I send my messenger, and he will prepare the way before me. Where is God? He's here. His messenger is on the way to prepare the way. And if the messenger is on the way, it means the Lord must be on his way too. So verse 2 goes on, "But who can endure the day of his coming? And who can stand when he appears?" That's the problem. When he appears, who can stand? When he comes, who will be exempt from his justice? Down in verse 5 of chapter 3, it says this, "Then I will draw near to you for judgment. I will be a swift witness against the sorcerers, against the adulterers, against those who swear falsely, against those who oppress the hired worker in his wages, the widow and the fatherless, against those who thrust aside the sojourner and do not fear me, says the Lord of hosts." The list there in chapter 3 includes something from each part of the Mosaic law. So in that way it represents the whole of God's law. Now this then is the situation. God's people cry out for justice. Where is God, they say? But the Lord is weary with their cry, because he is coming. And when he comes, who will be able to stand? Be careful what you wish for. But there is hope here. In the second half of verse 2, and in verse 3 of chapter 3, so from verse 2 into verse 3 of chapter 3, we read, "For he is like a refiner's fire, and like fuller's soap." Verse 3, "He will sit as a refiner and purifier of silver, and he will purify the sons of Levi and refine them like gold and silver." When the Lord comes, he will separate. Just like a refiner's fire will melt gold down into a liquid form, so all the impurities float to the top and then they can be separated out. When the Lord comes, he will separate, just like how soap will remove dirt from material. Be careful what you wish for, because the Lord will indeed bring justice. And therefore, what one of us will be able to stand? But here is the hope. When the Lord comes, he will also bring out for himself a people. He will refine them. He will refine his people of their impurity. He will wash away their dirt. These people had been unfaithful, and yet God is faithful, and God will save those he has determined to save. Where would we be without the grace and mercy of God? So that's a recap. Next week we'll carry on and we'll pick this up from chapter 3 and verse 6.